Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens. My name is Tim, and this week, together with Citi's E4Education campaign, we're going on a journey to explore how global citizens can put that valuable skill set to work as part of a global career. We'll be connecting with Citi employees in financial capitals around the world, all of whom have generously agreed to share their stories, observations, and tips for finding success in this highly interconnected global economy. Today, we're traveling to New York City to speak with George Argyropoulos. George is joining us to talk about working, living, and thriving professionally in New York City. But before we meet George, I want to welcome the teachers, students, Reach the World travelers, and early career professionals who are watching today. Please feel free to use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and to share any questions you have for our guest as we go. And with that, I think it's time for us to journey to New York City. I'm going to bring George in. Hey, George, welcome to Reach the World.
Tim, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
I am doing great. Thanks for joining us today. Very excited to speak with you about New York City in particular and your global career path. I thought we'd get started just getting to know you a little bit better and hearing about how you came to be at Citi. If you had any sort of experiences that inspired you to become a globally competent worker.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, hey, everybody. As Tim, thanks for the intro, and I appreciate the pronunciation of the last name there. It's definitely a hard one to get. But I work at the New York headquarters. I grew up, I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Canada. I lived there till I was about 19, like a classic Canadian. I grew up playing hockey, and I think hockey was kind of a good segue and one of the very important kind of parts of my journey that allowed me to get to where I am now. But I think even before hockey and before I was involved in school and where I really found the correct route to becoming a Citi employee and a global employee. I think it was really when I was younger. My father, who was an entrepreneur, he owned restaurants, and from the very beginning, I always liked the business aspect of it. I never really wanted to have the restaurant as my future, but in terms of like the financials and the business side of things, that was always something that really um, attracted me. Eventually, he went to the U.S. with a couple restaurants, and I enjoyed kind of the traveling. I know U.S. and Canada is close, but even the fact that he got to maybe travel and experience was something that I thought I would fit well there and something I would want to do. And just again, I should have said that right now I'm on the trading floor. So the every day there's always people talking around and a lot of noise. So it's kind of part of the day. Um, but yeah, so when hockey, why it's an important part, it brought me to the US for at least for the long term. I went to school in Chicago. I went to Lake Forest College. Um, Lake Forest itself was probably where I established most of my long term and strong relationships. And really, Lake Forest College is a huge multinational college. We have, I think, over 135 different nationalities that are part of the college and at any given time are enrolled. And I think that was my first real experience of, hey, like I know all these people. One of my best friends is from the Czech Republic, another from Sweden, and just meeting these people kind of sparked my interest to want to still be able to establish these relationships in my everyday professional life. So we had a couple alma mater that went to Lake Forest that worked at the Citi Chicago office, and that was sort of my in to finance. I knew I wanted something in business within my time at college. I really narrowed that down to finance, and wasn't sure banking or kind of the market side where I am now, but eventually with my contacts. From my school, sorted out, knew I wanted to be in the markets facing business. So I ended up getting the job and moved from the Chicago office to New York full time. I think what's pretty cool we know Citi is a enormous bank and it's all over the world. What's great about we do a 2-year rotational program as a new hire at Citi, and just by happenstance, I happened to be on two very broad-based desks. So an EM credit desk where I was talking with colleagues and clients or colleagues out of Asia, colleagues in the UK, and we're primarily because we're in New York with a New York hub, we deal specifically with New York clients, but I was able to establish relationships all over the world. And even on my first desk, I'm comfortable with the relations I built. If I go to the UK tomorrow for vacation, I'll be able to stop in, say hi to the old colleagues, and it was a great kind of networking experience. And I think even easier to talk about is where I am now on the foreign exchange corporate sales desk. Foreign exchange, it's all over the world. Cities reach and capabilities in foreign exchange are all over the world. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm chatting with colleagues in Brazil, in Mexico, in the UK, and there's a ton of outreach. And what I really enjoy about my day-to-day is that experience and the ability to kind of grow and understand different kind of cultures and have just a vast net of contacts globally. I think that's something very cool in my day to day.
Yeah, that's such an interesting career path, George. This is the first mention I've heard of sports as a way of interacting with people from other countries, but it makes so much sense. So many people, meet athletes through whatever sports they play and get their first sort of taste of other cultures and other ways of doing things through those sports interactions. That's a really interesting point.
Definitely. I think sports was a huge driver of mine and huge kind of growth opportunity to expand kind of what I know, who I know, and the skills I learned to really put them into the day to day.
It's especially interesting to me because you don't immediately equate it with your career path. That like
Yeah.
you're going to play hockey or you're going to play baseball or you're going to play whatever sport, and you don't realize it might have implications for your global skill set that could make you more competitive for a job.
Oh, definitely. I think you learn, and you in any kind of sport or even hobby that you enjoy and you take more serious, you learn a ton of different skills, how to interact with different people. You pick up. It's funny how transferable the skills and maybe um, interests and kind of attitudes towards sports can actually transfer to the day to day for sure.
For sure. Well, let's zoom in, excuse me, a little bit to New York specifically. And I'm kind of happy to hear you're not a native New Yorker because you
Hmm.
can give us some perspective on what it's like to move to New York and to be like really successful in this market that's known for being very fast paced and the city that never sleeps. Like, what is it like to live and work in New York City?
You know what? Coming from Canada, I lived in Toronto and then went to school just north of Chicago. I've lived in some pretty world-class cities, but I think New York, like you said, it doesn't sleep. It definitely takes a little bit of time to get used to. Um, you're always in the mix. I always joke around. We say New York is the mix because there's always something going on. There's a ton of different cultures and things to do, all blended together. And at the beginning, there is an adjustment, but then you start to kind of get in tune with the city, start to be able to enjoy it. It's not so much of a super kind of overarching or overhang where everything's always going on. You start to really vibe with it, I think, so to speak. um, Working in the New York office is very cool. If you're working in a global headquarters of any country, I think you're the center, right? And it's interesting to be the center because there's always an outreach from you out to the different, I guess you would call them hubs, to establish that communication and making sure the business is a large business. So it's never can never all be done from one certain spot. So at the center, at the HQ, there's a lot of outreach to the different areas of the bank in different regions across the world. Um, and then at the same time, the hub, there's also a lot of inreach from outside in. And much like New York and the variety of cultures and things to do in New York, it fits pretty well in terms of office life. A ton of understanding the different areas of the world, growing your knowledge, your attitude toward working in a global business, living in a global city. I think it's very interchangeable, and it's honestly it's awesome.
Great. I've been really especially looking forward to talking to you because a lot of the other people we're talking to as part of this global career journey are in markets outside of the United States. And I think it's common, perhaps misconception that if you want to have a global career as a young American, you need to like go outside of the United States and work in the UK or work in Egypt or work in Shanghai or someplace outside of the United States. Can you just talk a little bit about how you could stay within the United States in a place like New York City and have an extremely global career?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So one, I think in your day to day, your career, whether you're physically in the country or not, your career is still very oriented around being a global partner, right? There's always daily interactions. There's never a day where I don't speak to someone at least from two other countries. Like that is how closely connected you are. And then when you establish these connections, it opens up doors. How I would put it is at different jobs around the world, but even in New York, if it's a global network and a global kind of company and your headquarters or you're working in New York as your primary base, there's always opportunity to go elsewhere. You don't need to fully sit in the UK, but clients or companies have offices all over the world. I know there's pushes in certain areas to get New York people into London offices for a few weeks, to some Latin American offices for a few weeks. And although you're not sitting there full time, you still have these opportunities to experience what it means to be part of a global kind of corporation. And I think that is very, very cool. And then down the line, things always change. If you happen to say, "Hey, I like working in the UK. I worked there 2 weeks. I wish I worked there full time." I think there's a vast variety of opportunity, um, even if you're starting in the US or a city like New York.
All right, this is a very like nuts and bolts practical question, but when you're dealing with people in other countries, sort of
Hmm.
in both directions on the time zone chart, how do you
Hmm.
keep track of all the time zones and what time it is, where you're calling, and etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I have my trusty world clock because we're in FX. It's really a 24/7 market. There's times this isn't going to sound too glamorous, but there's times we're on telephone calls at 10 at night our time, even later sometimes, or 3, 4 in the morning, just because is someone has to give, right? If we're calling out in Asia, someone's got to be waking up extra early or staying in super late. Sometimes you're on the good end of the coin and your regular market hours and they're making the sacrifice, but it's at the end of the day it's really a team. We're not in the same office, but we're still a team. So you make those sacrifices, you're connecting with them on finding the best time, right? It's not always great for all parties involved. And I'm laughing because just last week I was here quite late, so it's fresh in my mind. But you're getting that experience. You're talking to your colleagues in other parts of the world, and even that alone is nice and worth it.
So is it fair to say the floor you sit on and what's behind you in your background just never closes? Is it always open?
So we will be like a 6:45, 7 till about 6, 7, depending on the busyness. Then we'll pass it over to our colleagues in Australia, who then
Mm,
pass it over to our colleagues in Singapore, which then pass it over to London and then back to us with some
mm.
overlap in between kind of each time zone. But the product I'm on and foreign exchange in general, people all over the world need to transact in foreign exchange. So we
Right.
really can't afford to sleep except on the weekends at Friday at 5, and then when Asia comes in, our New York time Sunday at 5-ish PM.
Well, it sounds exciting in a way, to just be involved in something that's really circling the globe with the sun and,
Yep.
being a part of this thing that never stops and is always moving and keeps us all interconnected.
Yep.
I want to just shift now to some real concrete career advice. You've
Hmm.
obviously been very successful in your career path, and there are a lot of people listening who are just wondering what they need, what they could work on to become more competitive for a job like yours, what skills you've found are especially useful, or even what you've observed being, really handy tools to have in your tool belt, so to speak, for a job like yours.
Yeah, for sure. I think tools and maybe experiences, I would kind of put them together because I think you really develop the certain tools v- because of your experiences, right? Like I was lucky that hockey and the fast-paced nature of the sport, and when you play in college, you have to balance your sport and your education at the same time and try and ensure that both are done to the best of the abilities. But I think that's translatable to kind of any experience you have. I wasn't, because I was playing hockey, I didn't get to study abroad, but having these worldly experiences can transfer into skills, um, and tools, so to speak, being a worldly individual just as well as hockey did for me, into being able to balance sports and education at the same time. I think in terms of like some specific skills that I try and focus on, I think it's having like a good, and I almost don't put this as a tool, but kind of having the ability to like remain calm. I think that is big. There's always stuff going on in kind of your life with what you're doing, but being able to stay calm and show your skills that you develop kind of naturally over time or you focus on working on is, for me, has helped me a lot, right? Sometimes we can get flustered and the day is crazy. Um, but being able to keep that even keelness of balancing and knowing your skills and being able to show your skills in all sorts of, no matter what's going on externally, I think was very important. When you get down into the nitty gritty, I think being like detail oriented has been something that's helped me. And then I'm sure just being a person. It sounds funny, but be who you are, be the person, right? Like a lot of times you look at kind of interview questions and, oh, I got to prepare for this, and yes, but at the same time show who you are, because a lot of that has a lot more weight, I think, than people tend to realize, and people get caught up on the other stuff to make them look good or think they want it, but we kind of you want to show the natural you. I think that's huge. Everyone has skills that they bring to the table on any given day. So
All right, that is fantastic advice, and it's perhaps even the easiest path to just be yourself and let yourself show through.
yeah.
Um, yeah, amazing. So we've talked about really the heavy stuff as it relates to global careers. I'm gonna sort of finish today with what can be a light question, but is also a very challenging question when it
Mhm.
comes to just experiencing New York outside of work. Part of living in such a cool global city is that you have access to all of these great experiences.
Mhm.
For someone who is watching today who has never been to New York, or is coming there for the first time, what would you suggest? What's a great way to just dive in and really experience the magic of New York?
Yeah, so I'm a big artist. But believe it or not, I love and enjoy art, and I paint on my free time. I know it sounds like, based off my explanation of FX being a 24-hour market, we don't have much, but we do. I love going to art museums. I think that's a ton of fun. And then also the food. I'm I hate to admit it, I don't go to enough cool places in New York, given the amount of different places that are available to me. But the food is tremendous. Um, there's a whole bunch of on Instagram. You have a ton of kind of feeds that follow the New York kind of food scene. I love going out when I can to try different restaurants and try and stay away from the classic kind of American bistro. In New York, it's funny how many different and great places are not American and from different parts of the world. Um, we're on the desk here in New York are a big Joe's Shanghai fan. So if you're ever coming and you remember this Joe's Shanghai, they have great soup dumplings there and a ton of other um, cuisine. But that is our main go-to here.
Oh, that sounds good. I always walk away from speaking to you and your colleagues around the world who, are also typically lovers of good food, being very
Hmm.
hungry, but
Yes,
for very different things. Now it's soup dumplings. That sounds so good.
yes.
Um, George, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and learning about your global career journey. I also want to thank our entire audience for tuning in today. There's a few more Citi Global Career Journey stops to come still this week, so please stay tuned. And if you missed any of our previous stops on this global career journey, you can find recordings of those events at Reach the World's YouTube channel, where we've set up a special Citi Global Career Journey playlist. Special thanks to the Citi E4Education campaign and to all our many Citi volunteers, including you, George, for making this learning experience possible. Thank you again, George. This was a lot of fun. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim.